Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We have over 700,000 active watchers right now, and we have had 1.6 million people tune in throughout the day. Don, Justin, and Jamey, it is a pleasure to have you here. Let's dive right in. Don, what does aspirational masculinity mean to you, and why is it so important in the context of eliminating violence against women?
Thank you, Pierre, and it's a pleasure to be on with you, Justin and Jamey. Big fan of your work over the years. I've been involved in prevention programs for nearly 40 years, and specifically in the area of preventing men's violence against women and engaging men in the prevention of men's violence against women for the past 30 years. And in so many ways, I talk about the work that I've been doing has been the work that women and survivors have asked men like myself and Justin and Jamey to do, but it hasn't been the work that our boys need. And so I offer aspirational masculinity as a paradigm shift to the work where we are moving from prevention work to promotion. What do we want for our boys and men? Not just what do we want them to do to prevent or to support women and girls, but what do we truly want for boys? And one of the things that I talk about with aspirational is I want boys to live in awe, authentic, whole, and evolving, so that they're living their authentic selves, their whole selves, and evolving. Masculinity and manhood is not something that you arrive at and you're done when you're 50 years old. It's a constant evolving of who we are as men, and that allows us to remain in the conversation. And finally, as I talk about having a positive conversation with young men that keeps them engaged, when we want success in the classroom or in athletics, we don't coach to not lose. Again, prevention language. We don't coach to win by a point. You don't teach in the classroom to pass by a point or to not fail. You teach excellence in the discipline. You teach excellence in the sport, so that the innovation is level of growth in that sport. The same thing is true that we need to do for our boys, is have a positive conversation with them that allows them to see themselves in the conversation, in their authentic selves, in their old selves, and is a positive one that gives them something to work towards.
Authentic, whole, and evolving, and going towards not just prevention, but promotion. Powerful words. Justin and Jamey, in what ways does the portrayal of masculinity in the media impact young men's attitudes towards women and towards relationships? Jamey, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Wonderful to see you and be here. I was raised in an era, I'm now 55 years old. And I was raised in a time when women, honestly, to be fully honest, were seen as objects, something to attain, something to accumulate, something to get. And while I had some powerful women in my life, this is the messages that I saw all the time on television, in music. I also was raised in the music industry, and this just runs rampant to women are acquired. I then have a son who's 21. I tried really hard to have him watch things that illustrate and show women in powerful positions. Not that there's anything wrong with women, of course, doing more traditional roles, but also needed to see women in light that oftentimes he saw men, which were powerful leaders, thought thinkers. And this is something that I was really diligent on. And yet I still did not have the tools that I have now. I have a son now that is 8 years old. Every day, I don't just have him watch things, of course, that demonstrate the power of women and how to see them as equals. But he sees me around and in myself engaged constantly with powerful and incredible, wonderful women that he can see as equals, contrary to what media constantly still reminds us, that they are indeed objects, that they are ones to follow men's lead. We even see politically how this plays out. We see it in sports. So I think it's more how we engage ourselves and what we surround ourselves can change, hopefully, what the media continues to portray. So we're working hard at Wayfair. Justin will speak to this a bit more as well, to change that narrative as much as we can, because we certainly know it has a great impact.
Justin, take it away. How do you help leverage media to change that narrative?
First of all, I'm so happy to be here. And Don, your work is so important and beautiful. So it's wonderful to finally meet you. When I think of media, I think about, the reinforcing of trope after trope after trope that just has been happening for forever. I do want to focus on the hope, because I do see this changing. I do see this moving in a positive direction. Because if we keep going back to like all the things that we see that are wrong, just kind of like anything that we just, you start to look for those things, as opposed to you're starting to see a lot more men on TV and in films that are showing, as Don said, more aspirational tropes of masculinity. What I think is important now, and what we're always thinking about when we are making a film or financing a film or developing something, is like you don't want to just totally reinvent the man, because you need the man to be approachable. You need the man to still be a man, which is why from the very beginning, I've never been a part of any war on masculinity. I love masculinity. I love being a man. In fact, I think we need more advocates like the three of us here that actually talk about how amazing it is to be a man. And yet there comes with the responsibility to being a man, especially living today. And that is, being an advocate, an ally, and doing what we can to make this world a safer place for women. But we can only do that if we become safe places for ourselves. So the things that we look for at Wayfair, things that we're trying to push forward, is men that are able to express emotion, that are able to repair, that are able to self-reflect, that are able to nurture and caregive. Little moments that we can find in existing scripts where we're not trying to rewrite the man, but we show this, maybe traditional man who is who has a very specific role in whatever the movie or the TV show is, doing something that we maybe wouldn't see him do 20 or 30 years ago, saying a line in a different way, showing up as a father, listening, asking questions, self-reflecting. These are just little things that we're always trying to sprinkle in. Again, not trying to overhaul or change what it means to be a man, because we love men, but just adding in some aspiration, a sprinkle of aspiration, if you will. Don.
Love it.
Yeah, I love it as well. It's very powerful. And Justin, I hear that you're someone who lives in your emotions proudly. And my next question has to do with how can we as men become more effective allies in this cause? And I'd love to probe a little bit, if I can start with you, Justin, again, around the role of emotions in allyship as well. If you can speak a bit about that.
It's a great question. So yeah, I definitely live in my feelings. But I do try to have a balance. We don't want our feelings or emotions to run the show. There's a time and a place for everything. Look, as I wrote in my second book for Boys Will Be Human, and I said this a little bit earlier, until us men learn how to be safe places for ourselves, this world will never be a safe place for anyone. So I think we talk a lot about these big words, and these big words, it's really a small word, but I mean big in terms of what the word means. Allyship is an example. That's a big word for most men. How does one be an ally? And I think we have to kind of like roll it back a little bit, especially if you want to have real conversations and engage men with where they are. And it starts with meeting men where they are today. You can still push them. You can still invite them and teach them maybe how to be an ally. But it starts with where they are today. And generally, most men, in my personal experience, are trying to figure out their own lives. They're trying to figure out how they can be safe spaces for themselves. They're trying to figure out, and they're wrestling with whatever they're struggling with, whether it's providing, protecting, whether it's figuring out how to pay the bills. They're working so much they don't get to be with their kids. When they get home, they're tired. They're finding themselves frustrated with their partners, balancing gender roles. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that men experience on a day-to-day basis. And men don't have, as we know historically, and the data shows this, true friendships. We don't have places where we can be our authentic selves, where we can share our emotions, where we can talk about our feelings. And generally, we also hide those feelings from ourselves. We don't have the ability to feel them. As Bell Hooks writes in A Will to Change, the first act of violence we commit in a patriarchal society is not violence against women, it's violence against ourselves, where we numb ourselves and we commit that act of soul murder, right? And when we don't allow ourselves to deeply feel something, we are committing an act of murder, where we are generally we're murdering that little child inside of us that just desperately needs to feel. So how do we do this? Going back to your question, we have to start with ourselves, right? It's the man in the mirror. We have to look at ourselves. We have to ask ourselves what we're feeling. And for those of us who are fathers, this starts also with our children. On a daily basis, I ask my son, well, what's he feeling? What does it feel like in his body when that happens? He tells me something happens at school. And I ask him, oh, that must have been really hard. And he might just say, no, it was okay. And I'll push back. I'll be like, well, what is that? Are you sure? What does that feel like? There's got to be a feeling. What does it feel like in your body? Because at 30 years old, when I first went to therapy, the therapist asked me what it felt like. I didn't have an answer for it. I didn't have any vocabulary for my own feelings. And I'm not alone. And I was a pretty quote unquote, don't love the word, but woke man, right? In the sense that I was in touch with my feelings. I didn't have a word for what I was feeling. And I'm not alone here. Millions of men are just like me. So we have to learn the vocabulary. We have to learn how to be safe spaces for ourselves. We have to learn how to describe what we're feeling. We have to be willing to reach out and make a friend, reach out and ask for help when we need it, go to therapy, and learn how to be those safe spaces for ourselves. And then we can talk about allyship. But it's kind of a cart horse situation, in my opinion.
I love that. And what a beautiful reflection as well on how feelings and the importance of understanding and processing one's feelings play a role in creating safe spaces for ourselves and rekindling that inner child that was so playful and comfortable in himself. Don, I want to come to you and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what allyship means to you.
Pierre, I think Justin just nailed it. And as he was talking, he mentioned bell hooks and that quote, that the first act of violence that patriarchy as a male does not violence against women, it's violence against ourselves. I gave Justin a double thumbs up. I know he probably couldn't see that, because that is the place from which so many boys start this journey and never actually heal, because we don't talk about that. And the other part of that quote is that if a boy doesn't do that psychic self-mutilation, that patriarchy will enact rituals that do it for him. And that's the language. And I mean, if you look behind me, you'll see the trophies that are a testament to that ritual. I survived and thrived in one of the ultimate rituals of boyhood, of manhood, which was sport. And it taught me nothing but to ignore my feelings, to ignore my emotions, to push through. And I was lionized for it. I was celebrated for it. And so we kind of give virtue to the very things that I talk very often about. Men who I knew through playing football, there were 33 of them when I published my book in 2019 who were dead. 6 of them were suicide. 6 of them were men who could not say, I'm struggling, I'm hurting, I need help. And they became victims of the same thing that made them warriors, was their inability to fully express and fully be whole. And so if we're going to be allies to women and girls, we have to first be allies to ourselves. We have to first be able to look inward and say, how do I live my wholeness? And therefore, one of the things about, Jamey mentioned this about women in politics and women in leadership positions, if men can't identify with the qualities that we associate with being women, being loving and caring and vulnerable, if we can't identify with that within ourselves, then we'll never respond to women's leadership, because we see women in those qualities as being less than, as being less important. And so in order for us to be allies to women and see and value women, we have to see those qualities that we associate with being feminine or with being women in ourselves, because they exist in ourselves. Being loving and caring and vulnerable, to Justin's point, it's not a feminine quality. It's not my feminine side. It's my wholeness as a man. And I have to learn how to, and I am probably less so than Justin living my emotions. I've had to relearn. And I'm so glad, Justin, you said we don't need to reinvent masculinity. We need to show the wholeness of it. We need to be able to show it, see it, name it, and most especially for older men, model it for younger men. Model being vulnerable, model being weak, model having trouble identifying with how I'm feeling about something, so that young boys can say, oh, it's okay when I'm feeling this way. And then therefore I can be more open to that conversation.
Thank you, Don. And Don, I want to stay with you really quick, because what you said around we become victims of the same thing that made us warriors really resonates. And I'm wondering, right, what are some effective ways to engage young boys, young men in discussions about healthy relationships so that they don't become victims of what made them warriors?
Well, once again, the word relationship, I think everyone has said this about these big words that we use. I talk about what relationship do you have with yourself and what relationship do you have with those around you. And so I think it begins with that. It begins with boys looking at themselves first.
Thank you. And Jamey, if I can turn over to you, and I want to hear a little bit about what progress have you seen in promoting healthy masculinity, and where do you think more work is needed?
What progress have I seen? And just promoting it. Well, I can say by being on the Man Enough podcast, for instance, just talking about it, having a safe place for men to watch and hear other men struggle, but promoting it in that way gives permission to others to say, I'm thinking that similar thing myself as well. I also see that the amount of friends I have now that are in therapy, reflecting, looking at themselves is much different than when I was younger. In my first marriage, none of my friends were ever thinking about therapy. Now all of my friends are. We're seeing the promotion of being healthy and reflecting is actually having impact on men. Sure, we need more men to engage and to embrace it as well, but I'm seeing it real time. And also, just a quick anecdote. The other day, Justin and I were at this event, and his son had thought a particular thing that Justin had mentioned to him, and actually Justin's information was incorrect. And I had told his son, actually, that's not true. The playoffs are blah, 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 blah. And what Justin did real time, by the way, I know you probably remember this, was in front of a lot of people, Justin took a moment and said, hey, son, what I told you earlier, I was wrong. The information you have now is correct. I was wrong. I told you something incorrect. And it's a small gesture, but what he saw was a man being accountable, reflecting, and not afraid to show that he's not always right, that he could be wrong, and he doesn't have to be ashamed of being wrong. So I think we're seeing in real time. I'm seeing with my kid, just another one real quick example. My son has a best friend at school. These two boys, they're 8 and 9 years old. They hold each other and hug each other every single day. I don't mean just a normal like dap. I mean embrace and hold and say, I'm going to miss you so much. I love you. And they do this in public and don't feel ashamed to do so. I was a kid, I would never have held another boy at 8 and 9 years old because that meant something weak. So I think just promoting and talking about it, we are seeing the impact. We got to do a lot more work, of course, and follow up. But yeah, I'm actually saying talking about it in itself gives other men and boys permission.
I just want to say one thing. I want to piggyback off that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know how many men are listening. I don't know how many men are listening to this around the world, but it's really, really sweet when we see these young boys engage in this behavior where they are showing emotions, they're showing affection. They'll hug each other, they'll hold each other's hands. I love watching Jamey's son and his best friend, and my son and Jamey's son together. They'll lay next to each other. They'll be super close together and they'll play a game. And there is no feeling that that's wrong. They haven't learned that yet. Society hasn't reinforced that yet. And one of the ways that, as Don, you can speak a lot to this, and this is a lot of your work, especially, with Jackson Katz and all the work you guys have done. But what society will do is we will start to label those things feminine. And then we'll start to use that language in a derogatory way to shame that emotion, to shame that affection, to shave those behaviors out of the boys. And so what ends up happening is that they grow up starting to hate those parts of themselves. And this goes back to what Don said earlier, which is it's not just about being able to support a female politician, if you will, because I'm not going to get into any of that stuff. But we got to like roll it way back. We hate those parts of ourselves. How are we going to ever let a woman lead us? It's one of the reasons why so many men struggle with, as an example, a woman making more than they do. If they're not the high earner and a woman makes more, or they struggle with having a female supervisor or boss or CEO. And it's because we have this part of ourselves that literally, unfortunately, hates, dislikes, distrusts women. But it's not the women. And that's what I want the men to know. It's not that you have an issue with women. It's that you have an issue with what society told you was feminine that exists in yourself. So if we can learn how to love those parts of ourselves, to retrain, to to relearn that, oh, wow, like, if I give my brother Jamey a hug and I look at him in the eyes, it doesn't mean that I'm feminine. It doesn't mean, another derogatory quote, it doesn't mean I'm gay, right? Because then we have to start teaching our children that that's not a bad thing, that those words aren't bad, that those things that those kids are going to say to you when they're young, those are not bad things. What does it mean? Like you said, your book was, throw like a girl, right? Well, what does that mean? I've seen girls throw farther than boys, and we have to teach our boys these things as young boys, right? So it's just re-education, it's relearning so that we don't have to hate those parts of ourselves, so that we can grow up and embrace and love the women in our lives, and then eventually one day be willing, especially it's more in the Western states than in America, be willing to have a woman be a leader as an example. But it starts in the micro before it ever hits the macro.
And Justin, can I just jump in on
Yeah, please, Don, please. Take the school.
Said the other part, and the other side of that is that, and the patriarchy, if you will, has co-opted certain qualities, and we've given them virtue, for example, strength, and we've narrowed the definition of strength. So men think of strength as being physical or being, guarding my emotions. Well, what takes more strength? To Jamey's point, does it take more strength to say, I am struggling? To be honest with yourselves, to be honest with people. It takes more strength to do that. And so we need to, not just to Justin's point, value those things that we consider feminine, but also to recognize the things that we consider masculine to be so narrowly defined that it inhibits our ability to really fully be whole and authentic. And one of those words that we very often say to men, and we give virtue to it, is to be a protector or a provider. Well, if that's what we want from men, then don't mess with my violent masculinity if you want me to protect mine, right? Because once again, that word protect is very, very narrowly defined. I have 2 daughters in college. I can't protect them. The only thing I can do is educate them and give them as much information so that they can live lives that are protective. But I can't protect them, but in the narrow sense of that definition means that I have to be the guardian at the gate. Right? I have to be the dad with the shotgun. That kind of nonsense that we've told men is part of being a protector. The reality is the protective qualities that we need is more information, not less.
Isn't that right?
I'd love to pick up on something here. And you've talked about the value of kind of doing introspection, all of you at different moments, thinking, reflecting around, about your masculinity and your behaviors. And it's making me think about the number of men, the increasing number of young men who are listening to podcasts, to media that is quite problematic, right? That pushes a certain view of masculinity. In fact, I have family members I know who listen to some of those podcasts around how to get a girl, or, how to make yourself more dateable, etc. What would your advice be to those men who are perhaps discovering themselves, right, and are leaning to those kind of podcasts, if you will, that promote a version of masculinity that is not what you would call aspirational?
What do you say to those that are listening to that? I'll just say one quick thing, and I think it's what Justin spoke to also. I think to ask men to not listen to podcasts of that nature, to steer them away from it, is not going to happen right now. I think, in fact, it only just makes them defensive, because men are searching. Men are looking for something, and they're looking to fulfill themselves. All of us are. So if, in fact, there are men that are wanting relationships, they want the positive things that they are seeing, but possibly doing it in a negative way. So listen to people double down on these stereotypes that we want to change, but they still are on an effort to fulfill themselves. And to ask someone, don't do that, that's harmful, don't do that, to call people out, as a lot of us might say, is not effective. Rather, I would say to someone who I just met recently, who is doing things that I don't necessarily approve of, I'm like, hey man, you're going to go down that path. But also, in the meantime, arm yourself with some balance. Why don't you listen to these as well? Consider these so that when you're developing your skills and you're going out in the world, you are armed with all the information. And I believe that truth always, eventually, outweighs the things that are negative and that are falsehoods. So if we can arm men with opportunity to have emotional conversations, to see the beauty in the feminine qualities, I do think women are doing that better than men right now. embracing the feminine, embracing compassion and love and forgiveness and kindness and all of these things that make us whole humans. I do believe that they have a better, they're more in touch with it right now and are given permission to express those things. So when men can engage and be around it and possibly listen to a podcast, watch a show like This Is Us, Shrinking, some other shows that we've seen that speak to men and seeing them being vulnerable, then maybe that can outweigh these other things that they are attached to as well. But I do think it's dangerous to victimize men for finding their truth, finding a path that their father showed them, their uncle, that just makes them defensive. So we got to walk that really carefully.
And Jimmy, just followed that. I'm so glad you said that point about not victimizing men, not telling that they're bad. We in this field, I do blame in many ways the men in this field, the field that we are a part of, for pushing boys, a generation of boys, even further away from this dialogue. Because what we've been doing, and there's this word that I'm so glad that we are 30 minutes into this and no one has used the word toxic, right? Because I always tell people before we use toxic to talk about masculinity or relationships, we talk about toxic with regard to waste. And you separate toxic waste from garbage. And so we have a generation of young men who only heard masculinity spoken of in terms of its toxicity. We have not been telling boys that they are loving and caring and emotional and whole and authentic and all those things that everyone here is talking about. And so we once again, as I say, we have to give them something to walk towards. They're walking towards those negative podcasts because we're not giving them something to walk towards. We're telling them all the bad things. We're giving them the evidence, but we're not giving them the solution. We're not giving them something that they can say, wow, now I get it, right? Meanwhile, we're telling them that they're toxic, and we're telling them that masculinity is bad, and so they're going to people who are affirming that. And I know that, we don't get into politics, but that was a big part of what happened in the United States in the past month was men walking towards something that was like their fathers, that was like their uncles, that was like that very narrow form of masculinity that they grew up with.
Well said.
Justin, we have 1 minute left. And for the men in our audience today, what is the one thing that you would recommend that they do to be part of the effort to eliminate violence against women?
I think I talked about it earlier. I think every man who's listening needs to be willing to be brave enough to sit with themselves. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, how did I show up today? Did I show up in the way that I wanted to? How am I living my life? Is this what manhood feels like? Am I just following what was seen, or am I doing something different? Am I happy? Am I joyful? Do I feel free to sing and to dance and to be silly? Am I able to show up for my kids? Am I able to get on the ground and play with them? Am I able to emote? Am I able to feel? Am I able to show up for my partner, for my wife as an example? Do I have resistance doing the dishes or the laundry or housework? Am I only happy when I get sex? Like, you got to ask yourself these questions, and it's the asking of these questions that will take you down a path. Because generally we don't ask ourselves these questions. We're zombies. We're monkey see, monkey do. We're robots. We saw it before, so then we are that. And then before we know it, we get to be 80, 90 years old, and we no longer have that testosterone coursing through our veins, and suddenly we go quote unquote soft, and that's when we realize that we're humans. My message to men is to not wait. Don't wait till you don't have any more testosterone to be able to feel your feelings. There's nothing in the data or the science that says that having testosterone means you can't feel feelings. No. Embrace your testosterone. Be a man. Be manly. Do all those things. But let's just re-explore what it means to be a man so that we allow ourselves to express the full gamut of what it means to be human. And it starts by asking questions. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Don, Jamie, Justin, we're out of time, but thank you so much for this powerful and moving conversation. Until next time.
Thank you.